Hello. I'm going to try to keep this introduction fairly short and to the point. I'm recording this in February of 2026 from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and that historical context is very much the frame of this conversation, but the stuff we talk about should be relevant, no matter when you are listening to this. And yeah, I mean, life is very hectic here right now. Some of you may have seen already, a couple weeks ago, we did a big kind of virtual event on how artists can show up in this historical moment. And kind of just like exploring how we have more to contribute than just our art. And if you missed that, the full notes, the full slides are publicly available at my website. But kind of the big takeaway from the event was that sometimes I think we focus too much on kind of art as this like magical, mystical, spiritual thing that's all about like hope and imagination and vision and expression. And like on one level, of course, all that stuff is real and all that stuff does matter. But the event was about challenging ourselves, and I include myself in that, to also see the more practical, kind of down-to-earth ways that artists are uniquely positioned to contribute. So stuff like, fundraising, fundraiser shows, resource sharing, amplifying via like our social media platforms, amplifying movement calls to action, or just using, the space and the skills that we have access to not just write a powerful poem about what is happening, but maybe put a call out for multiple poems from multiple people in the community and then publish those poems in like a zine or a chapbook and, have an event where people get together and fold the zines together and it becomes this like community thing where people get to know each other and maybe you're supporting like an immigrant-owned coffee shop or whatever at the same time. The idea that it isn't just about the art, it is also about the space that the art can create. Again, lots more examples of that in the notes. This video, however, is kind of the flip side to that whole conversation because like I said, artists have more to offer than just our art, but it is also true that the art can and does matter, that historically there has been a relationship between successful movements and the narrative shifting and imagination expanding work that artists can do. So like as a poet, I'm very interested in what makes a poem work, especially in the context of a poem that is trying to inspire or educate or call to action or affirm or mobilize or challenge the audience, right, around a specific political or social issue. And of course, a poem doesn't always have to do that. But if a poem is going to be used, for example, like to ground the participants at like a vigil and remind us of what we're fighting for, or to fire up the audience before a big march or action, or just share it on social media to like help spread the word about what is going on. Like in all of those situations, I think it matters that the poem is like good, right? And good is a very, very, very complex thing. Like when I talk about craft, I'm not talking about, what's going to get you into a competitive MFA program or what's going to get you published in some literary magazine that like lots of fancy, smart people read. I'm talking about craft in the sense of how art can move people, how it can go deeper, how it can bring ideas and emotions and possibilities to the table that like media folks and influencers and sometimes even organizers are just not equipped to share in the same way. Basically, I think we as artists, and again, I'm focusing on poetry here because that's my community, but this can relate to all kinds of art. But like as artists, we have opportunities to share work that isn't just right, that isn't just like checking the poetry box at the event so they can say they had some art in between the speakers. But like I think we can do real work. This video is about exploring what that means. What is the difference between a poem that you agree with and a poem that moves you? When someone shares a poem, like before a training or at a fundraiser event, what is the difference between a poem that's like, okay, I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna listen to it, I'm gonna applaud politely when it's over, and like I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna pump my fist, and because this poem gave me some spirit and some energy that can be fuel for the work that I'm going to do, the work that is still to come. And like, there's not one answer to any of those questions. They're big, complicated questions, and like I don't know anything about anything. So I invited three friends to kind of just explore all this stuff together. And of course, share some poems too. In this video, you're going to hear from Ollie Schminkey, Isha Camara, and Seymour Perspective. And I chose those three specifically because one, they're all just talented poets writing about what is going on right now. Two, they all have experience as teaching artists or as coaches. So they're used to thinking about these kinds of questions. And three, like, there's a million people I could talk to who are like doing good work, but in arts communities, it can sometimes be an issue that we draw from the same well over and over. So I wanted to talk to three artists who maybe aren't household names, that maybe you don't already know, but who are brilliant and have something meaningful to share. So I hope all this can be useful. Obviously, if you're a poet, but also like if you're some other kind of writer, a songwriter, or even like if you don't see yourself as a creative writer, but maybe you speak at action sometimes, or maybe you facilitate meetings, or maybe you just create social media content for a movement organization. Like, I hope anyone who works in the realm of communication can find something useful in this conversation. One, just quick note, I'm going to post this whole thing as one super long video. I know 100% that like there probably isn't going to be a ton of people who watch the whole video. I will be taking like shorter clips from it to share, but I hope the people who can use it find it. It is there for you if you are that person who wants to sit down and listen to this long conversation. And maybe it's in chunks over a few days while you eat lunch, maybe you have a long drive or something, but this could have been a big live panel discussion event. But if I'm being super honest, I just don't have the energy to organize stuff like that right now in this moment. I do not want to be like, this is me personally, like encouraging people to leave their houses and go to an event when like a lot of people are not trying to leave their house right now because of what is happening here in Minnesota. And my hope is that this kind of virtual, like watch on your own time style of event, the asynchronous aspect of it, can be useful for people who, like I said, again, don't want to leave their house. It isn't safe for them to leave their house. Like, I still want to have this conversation with you and with anyone who's interested in this stuff. So of course, this is an ongoing conversation. There are no easy answers, just a lot of food for thought, and a lot of really good poetry. So thank you for watching. Thank you to my three guests who you're going to hear from in a moment. Let's get into it. Part 1, a conversation with Ollie Schminkey. Edit into the moment.
Yeah, yeah,
So let's just jump right into it. I would love, Ollie, if you would read Land of 10,000 Lakes.
absolutely. Land of 10,000 lakes. Land of cabins and bonfires and beer. Land of ope and you betcha. And I'm just gonna sneak right past you. Land of cream of mushroom soup. Land of tater tot hot dish. Land of shoveling your neighbor's sidewalk. Land of holding open the door. Land of the loon's call across the lake. Land of the northern lights painting the sky. Land of the wilderness and the wild. Land of the Mississippi River's birth. Land of small things turning mighty. Land of tear gas pluming against an umbrella. Land of children too scared to go to school. Land of blood on the car's headrest. Land of boots and camo and guns. Land of SUVs flooding the streets. Land of masked men at my favorite gas station. Land of masked men demanding to see your papers. Land of masked men kicking doors down. Land of masked men choking people I know. Land of masked men brutalizing high school students. Land of whistles shrieking in the night. Land of whistles shrieking in the morning. Land of whistles shrieking in the afternoon, land of crying in your car, land of bullets and shovels and brooms, land of people stolen from their cars and their jobs and their homes, land of those who are left, land of neighbors, land of this is your home no matter where you come from, land of whistles, land of crowds, land of kicking the tear gas back under the SUV, land of donation, land of sex shop turned community center, land of grocery store drop-offs, land of community patrol, land of signal chats and zines, land of printing in multiple languages, land of you belong here and we will prove it, land of proving it, land of learning that love is a verb, land of finding out exactly who you are and what you are made of, land of drums and song and rally, land of all night noise outside of any hotel that dares house the devil, land of ice agents slipping on the ice, land of winter and frostbite, land of nature as our first love and ally, land of tater tot hot dish, discreetly delivered, land of cabins, offered for a safe place to rest, land of the northern lights, our cell phone screens lighting up the internet as we film, land of 10,000 neighbors, land of small things turning mighty, land of the Minnesota goodbye. Didn't you know? We are bad at saying goodbye to those we love. We could stay here all night, shoes on in the entryway, refusing to open the door.
Wow. Yeah, I know our virtual audience is applauding. And I know, okay, so again, I do want to talk about this poem kind of in a meta sense about like how it's landed when you perform it live and how the internet kind of response has been. But let's start with the actual poem because I think sometimes, particularly in moments of crisis and like political upheaval, people turn to poetry, not everyone, not in a universal sense, but often solely through the lens of like this feels good. I appreciate this, the emotions of it. And like that's obviously important. That's like an incredibly important function of the work. But for this video little event that we're doing, I really do want to talk about craft, not so much craft in the sense of like what's going to get you into the Iowa Writers Workshop or what's going to get you published in the New Yorker or whatever, but like why does a poem work? What separates a poem that is like, I like this, I agree with it, this speaks to my reality, from a poem that is like, oh, this moved me. And I feel like this is a very moving poem. And so just I'll share a couple observations, then I'll throw it back to you and we can just talk about it a little bit on that craft level. I think the most striking thing, like the most obvious thing is the repetition, right? And I feel like repetition is a tool that we come back to a lot because it's powerful. It creates that kind of bulldozer energy of the poem. But I also would say that I think repetition is very easy to do and difficult to do well, right?
Mm.
Like it's easy to write a poem where every line starts with the same two words, right? But like there's more going on in this poem than just every line starts with the same two words. And like as I was listening to it, I was tracking like the I'm not going to use the traditional like volta turn terminology, but just like the pivot moments where like you're talking about in a very broad sense like good things, and then you're talking about bad things, and then you're talking about good things again. And then at some point you're kind of like combining the like the stereotypes of Minnesota in the Midwest with the actual reality of what is happening now. And then of course at the end of the poem, the repetition actually breaks. So there's, three or four or five little pivot points in the poem. And I feel like that one like the bulldozer energy is still there because of the repetition, but those pivot points allow it to not become overwhelming or like boring. Even like it is always exciting, there's always like something interesting happening. There's also those opportunities for juxtaposition of like the kind of Minnesota stereotype stuff to like the really bad things that are happening right now to kind of a synthesis of them later. Um and that's just I'm not going to ramble on forever, but like that is an example to me of what we talk about with like anthemic energy, where it's like it isn't just like a positive poem, but it also isn't a poem that's just like, look how bad everything is, look how bad everything is, look how bad everything is. Like it is a poem that is acknowledging how bad things are while also pointing to our agency to do something about it, to like be fired up and like want to go out and change things. And like that kind of defiant energy this is such a good example of that. And it's a difficult thing to teach. It's a difficult thing to wrap my head around sometimes when I'm writing, but like I feel like this is one of the best examples recently of that kind of as a tactic. So I mean, I could go on. There's a million more things I could point out about this, but I want to throw it back to you about just anything, either based on what I was just talking about, or just in terms of your own process, like where your head was at when you were writing this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you brought up a lot of good stuff, and it's also really fun to talk to you about this too, because I'm often like teaching, and so it's like really nice to have like a back and forth dialogue of like the same things that we notice. I think what's interesting about this poem for me is that like it's not like I spent a long time on this poem. I think I wrote this poem in like 15 minutes, you know what I mean? And to me, I've been thinking a lot about like how to be imperfect and effective at the same time, right? Because I tried to show up perfectly and I can't do it. Imperfect is all it. It's imperfect or nothing, right? And so for me, I feel like one thing that's really helpful about the repetition in terms of like writing, and this also being a structure that other people can use to process things that are going on in their life too, is that the repetition says, here you go, you got it. Don't think about the structure of the poem, just go, right? And when you're talking about the different turns in the poem of like starting positive, moving negative, back to positive again, when I was writing this poem, I was thinking about like I've been thinking so much about Minnesota and like I'm from Minnesota. I'm from rural Minnesota, you know, and so like I grew up around like everybody who voted for Trump. And now some of those people are regretting it, you know, and I see some of those people taking it back and I say, "Hey, growth. I love that. Come be on our side. Welcome," you know. Um, and so starting off this poem with things that I feel like everyone can agree on, and then moving into things that people somehow don't agree on, but are just as true. Like when I was thinking of this poem, there are like no opinions in this poem. This
Mm,
poem is only images of things that are actually happening, have actually happened. So I think about this poem as a like trust your eyes kind of poem of like these are the details, and if you can't handle all of these details being in the same poem, like that is like literally just the reality that we're living in. Structure wise, one thing I feel like from a structural level that I often teach that I feel like is a really helpful thing here that I don't think you mentioned explicitly, maybe you did, whatever, is a callback at the end. So a
mm,
callback for folks who might not know is any time that you mention something earlier in the poem, you're going to bring it back later on in the poem. I always say that the most effective callbacks have some sort of like recontextualization, some sort of added information to this, right? And the way that I intended this callback to function in this poem is taking something really benign, like tater tot hot dish, or as we say, tater tot hot dish, you know, and like taking this benign thing and thinking, especially about how these like really like I use the word dinky. I think Minnesota's so dinky, by which I mean like silly, sweet, kind. You know what I mean? Minnesotan culture is so like just so yeah, dinky, you know, and like how these like I don't know, really kind, sweet, kind of silly things can be used as tools of resistance. You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know. That was a big ramble, but that's some stuff.
no, that makes so much sense. Like using the kind of, but one like there are some stereotypes, but then those stereotypes are wrapped up in realities, and like I think you do a good job of walking that line and using them. I This is a tangent. I don't want to talk too much about it, but like I never watched the Golden Girls growing up. Do you ever watch the Golden
No,
Girls?
I didn't know.
And we've been revisiting it just like while eating lunch or whatever, and there's a character who's from Minnesota, and the Golden Girls was on in like the late 80s or whatever, and like the Minnesotan character, I get now when I travel why everyone else has this stereotype of Minnesota. I think a lot of it is from Rosen Island and the Golden Girls. And it's like everything that you're talking about but like amped up to like 100. But just, yeah, again, the idea of as a poetic tactic, like using the I won't even say stereotype, but kind of the preconceived notion or the assumption as a tool to like you said, kind of bring people into the world of the poem, but then also recontextualize it and maybe share something new. I love what you said about how there aren't opinions in the poems. I didn't like notice that as I was listening to it and as I was reading it, but they are just statements of objective fact. And like I think a lot about like the Gwendolyn Brooks idea of like verse journalism, like using poetry, like one function of poetry, not all poems at all the time, but like one potential function is to just document what is happening and like illuminate what maybe people would rather stay in the dark. I think this poem does that really well too. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so much more going on here. Like we could dig into like the individual word choice stuff and all that. But I'm curious again on that meta level, like how has this been when you've shared it live? And I asked that question specifically because again, when I think about craft, it isn't necessarily what makes a poem good, right? Because I don't even know what good means, like in scare quotes. But what makes a poem work when you are up on stage in front of 100 people and you feel how they respond to it? Or what makes a poem work when you share it on the internet and people don't just like it, but they feel compelled to keep sharing it? Like, I mean, again, we could talk about how that plays out on the craft level, but also just in terms of your experience as the poet. Like, what has that been like?
Oh yeah. I feel like it's The reception to this poem has been really wild for me because this has been like my most like I don't know, like viral or whatever poem like in recent years.
Hmm.
And as a poet, I try to be really careful about like when and how I add my voice to things, especially because I think I don't, for me, based off of the reception of this poem, is like people are hungry for like emotional reflections of this moment as well. And I think that's one of the great functions of poetry is to be like a mirror and a witness, you know? And I think that I try to be very aware of like where I'm sitting, you know, because I can only offer the witness that I have, you know? And my witness is not the witness that everybody needs. That being said, the reception of this poem has been like so wildly positive beyond my wildest expectations. And that's been really cool. It's been resonating with a lot of people. I'm really glad to do that. I think this poem is a little unique in terms of my work because I feel like my work is often very rooted in my own personal narrative, and that's just like confessional narrative poetry is the type of poetry that I tend to write, you know? And this poem is not that way. I feel like this is a poem that can actually be read by anyone. Like honestly, when I first published it, I almost like I didn't put my name on it. My name is not on
Wow.
the shots, you know? So and what was really wild is that my sister, who lives in small town Minnesota, she happened to be going to like a Unitarian Universalist
Hmm.
sermon and they read this poem at the sermon and she sent it to me and like I don't know if you feel this or not, but I feel like a lot of like not that I don't think that my work is important or powerful or whatever, but I don't always get that feeling. And so like seeing someone else read it and they
Yeah.
read it like a normal person would read a poem. Like someone who's not trained in performance poetry would read a poem. And I just sat there and like cried, you know, because like hearing
Yeah.
your own work back to you, it's just wild. And it's wild to think of this, just that witness. It was really cool to be able to experience the power of that witness, you know, from the other side.
Yeah, and I mean it's as we like I'm gonna ask you for another poem in a moment, but like I think that's a good place to land a little bit is that one of the reasons I wanted to do this series too was that when I would go to movement events, so and that could be anything from like a training to like an organizing meeting to like a vigil. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes there would be art kind of incorporated into like the opening or whatever, but and again, this is not a critique. This is not like me trying to like throw shade or whatever. But like, it's great to sing like this little light of mine or whatever. Like that's cool. And I think, public singing is great. But I really wanted to help create more of a database or a record or options for people to bring other work into those kinds of spaces to like ground us before we get to the meeting or whatever. And so it's cool to hear you say like, so you don't mind then if someone were to take this and just read it at a vigil or at a Unitarian Universalist service or anything
No,
like that.
I mean, please do. And
Yeah.
like change the words if you want to something that feels true to you. Like you know, I mean like cool, I guess give me credit, but I don't know. I think about this moment and I think about how I don't need to be making money off
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what's happening right now and the power of the poem is beyond me. I don't know. Not to sound like too humble, but but like I just that wasn't the point of the poem. I want the poem to do the work. Anyone can
Yeah.
make it do the work, you
Yeah,
know?
the idea is you're contributing something. And I mean, that would be the last thing. Two quick points. Like one is, so a lot of people experience this poem for the first time on Instagram through your Instagram account, which I'll link or whatever. But in the info, it's not just like look at my awesome poem, or it's not just like no caption at all. You link to CAN, the Community Aid Network of Minnesota, Smitten Kitten, who's become like this epicenter of organizing, which is really cool. Defense 612, Mirac, like these are specific places people can go for those like next steps. Like, what can I do next? And I feel like I mean, that was the last event I did, right? Like, how can artists contribute in more practical ways? And like, it sounds like such a simple thing. It's so simple, people don't even want to talk about it. But like, linking to other stuff in the caption of a poem or a picture is really important because like people do not naturally know how to find those resources or like are not necessarily already plugged in. They might just like poetry, right? Or they might be from somewhere else and they just see your poem randomly online and like that then becomes a doorway into whatever the next step is for them as emerging activists or organizers or people who can give or whatever. Like that's just a really practical example of, again, how artists can show up beyond the poem itself. And then I want to go back to what you said earlier about like imperfection, and like I think the conversation that is had a lot in art spaces, right? To resist perfectionism and be like, you got to, sometimes you just got to write the thing, and maybe it's bad, but then maybe it'll like teach you something so you can write the next thing, or like maybe it isn't perfect, but it matters, right? And like people get something from it. I think about like the Springsteen song that just came out. Like there's a million critiques you could make of it, but it was like the song that needed to exist right now, and like
Yeah.
that's a whole other conversation. But of course, like that happens in art spaces, but that also that's a lesson for, again, emerging organizers and emerging activists, is like just show up, right? Show up in all your imperfection and figure things out as you go. Like you don't have to know all the answers before you can show up to the action or the meeting or whatever. And so I
Yeah.
think you're modeling that really well.
Oh, thanks, Kyle. I want to say one thing just in case, especially it's because like this is gonna be on the internet, and I feel like the internet is one of the least friendly places to like
Mm,
begin taking action, you know? I just want to give you blanket permission that you don't have to engage in the discourse.
mm.
The capital D discourse, right? Especially if you're like me and you survived the like really mean, pedantic
The discourse wars of
of
2014, 15,
yeah,
16, like
exactly. Like in 2014, I was like 20 years old and I was like, I need to be a good person. And in order to be a good person, I need to be mean to every person on my Facebook feed. Like you're allowed to have a relationship to activism and stuff or action or however you put it that like makes you feel good. Obviously, there are going to be things during this process that make you step outside of your comfort zone because it's not that comfortable to go to a protest. I'm very conflict avoidant, I was raised Catholic in the country in Minnesota. Like I am not a conflict person, and so like there's definitely parts that are going to be uncomfortable, and also like there's a lot that you can do. There's so many ways to plug in. And if you're not the guy that stands up and yells all the time, you don't have to be that guy.
yeah.
You can be something else.
I love that
Showing
notion
up
of,
imperfectly is better than not showing up. So yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
No, just that you don't have to be a subject matter expert to like
Yeah.
raise money for the food shelf. Like
You just
everyone
got to
can
share the link. You just
contribute.
got to give
Yeah.
$10. Yeah.
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 Cool. Well, again, in the spirit of keeping these conversations kind of short and punchy, I wanted to ask you if you had any other poems that are like, whether they're like quote unquote about what is happening right now, or just kind of are in the back of your head as you move through life right now, if you wanted to share anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been thinking a lot about, the late great Andrea Gibson, and what they would have said about this moment, because they were like very plugged into like all of the movements that I've experienced in my lifetime, and I think about like there's not very many people in my life or people's work who I've turned to as like an emotional leader or like like that sort of processing, like this moment, I would have ran to Andrea's Instagram,
Mm,
to see what sort of like emotional guidance or like witness that their work could provide. So I just want to share two short poems from Andrea's You Better Be Lightning that are obviously not about this moment because it it wasn't happening in the same way. Um, but that I feel like capture kind of like the heart of something that they might have said. This first one is about the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if I can just sneak another little thing, the pandemic's still happening, everyone. Never too late to put your mask back on. Everyone is at risk still. So yeah, okay. That's my little thing. Okay, moving on. Note to the stranger 6 feet away. There was never not a bridge from your chest to mine. My heartbeat was always the sound of your feet walking toward me. I can't believe how many years I lived without knowing the air you were breathing out was the air I was breathing in. Forgive me for not saying thank you before our lungs had a reason to hide. Do you pray more now than you used to? I pray all the time. I pray to the big bang and to the tiny bang and to all the bangs we'll all have to cut ourselves so we can see what beauty can only be seen from 6 feet away. A giraffe's neck is 6 feet long. A decade from now, will I remember the week I spent wondering if I could hug a giraffe's torso and not get sick if the giraffe coughed? I don't want to forget anything about this, especially not how it feels to worry about everyone I love at the same time. So much of the world had been doing that already. If every heart-worthy novelist weeps for days before killing off a beloved character, God must have spent centuries sobbing before pressing a pen to the page of this year. All right, and then I've got one
Right,
that's
go,
just
okay.
very, very short, very short. As I'm thinking a lot about like, like being occupied, them choosing to occupy a winter people in the winter, and how that's been going for them. I've just been thinking a lot about like nature, right? Okay, and this poem is a little bit on that, very short. Constellations rearrange themselves into a protest sign. Every uprising has the universe on their side. That's not a horizon. That's the earth drawing the line.
Yeah, I feel like both of those are so there's a bigger conversation we could have here about like the pros and cons of if you're gonna write quote unquote political work, the pros and cons of being really, really specific.
Mm,
And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think they're just different approaches, different tools, and I think a diversity of tactics, to use that term, is really, really important in an arts community and in like kind of a literary like poetry community. That like we have people talking about the issues from different angles using different tactics. Like if people know me, like I want to be an advocate for like be very explicit. If you're gonna make a
mm,
political statement, make the political statement, say the thing you're gonna say. I don't think that's better or worse, but there is an attitude out in the world that it is worse. That you should
mm,
not ever be explicit and you should not ever just say the thing you want to say, which to me is just like it's just extremely ahistorical. Like the
mm,
greatest art of all time that deals with political issues is often very explicit, and so like I find myself on that side of the conversation more often than not. That
mm,
like fight the power, f the police. Like these are classic songs, like poems that if we must die, like all these poems that are just very saying the thing, right? And so I find myself on that side of the conversation. But then like poems like this, I feel like really illustrate why my side isn't right or better. It's just different. It's just another way of thinking about it. Because these poems, like, they have a certain explicitness to them, and that they are kind of about something specific, but they're also just so big and like welcoming and like bringing people into it who might not already be thinking in that way. And I mean, Andrea's work has always been incredible in that sense of being so inviting. Yeah, is there any reason like those two in particular jumped out at you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's really interesting, like talking about Andrea's work, because I think that me and Andrea are very different poets, in a lot of ways, and I tend to be very, very specific. But I've just been thinking a lot about like the value of Andrea's work and that like general appeal, and I'm thinking a lot about like especially like I think about Andrea Gibson as like, and as a non-binary poet, like it's like you know what I mean? Just cool. I didn't have any fucking role models. Sorry, should I not swear? You know what I mean? I didn't have any role models. Like it's just cool. I love Andrea. They're so nice. Anyway, they were, okay. I'm getting off track. One thing that I've really come to appreciate about Andrea's work that I feel like is also like really applicable in this current moment is that it can speak to a lot of people's hearts. And I've been thinking about those kind of like universal feelings, especially for me, this particular round bout, I don't know, this particular moment and movement feels pretty distinct from a lot of the other things that I've lived through, like in Minneapolis. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot more of, not saying that this hasn't happened previously, but I'm seeing all kinds of people who I would say are like historically like apolitical. You know what I mean? Like my mom drove down. You know what I mean? Like I'm thinking about like all of these people from like greater Minnesota, from the country. I don't know if you saw that video of Aunt Tifa, which is, or, it's interesting because we say, what, it doesn't matter. Anyway, and like all of these people, these like cute little old Minnesotan women who are who are like saying all this stuff, and like kind of redefining or defining again that anyone can. can be a part of this movement, and everyone's resistance is helpful. Um, and I don't know, Andrea's work in like that universality really resonates with me right now.
Yeah, yeah. Not to reference Star Wars, but it's the whole thing of like the more they squeeze their fist, the more people kind of slip through their fingers. And like I
Mm.
think the idea of like people who have not traditionally been involved being more involved now, like that's been incredible to see. And that, I mean, that could be a place to end this too. Just like
Mm.
even apart from the art stuff and the poetry stuff, just any observations or things you'd want to share with people who aren't here. I know that's a big
Mm.
question. Or things that you're noticing that are worth kind of illuminating in this moment beyond, what we've already talked about.
Oh, that's a great
Or shout
question.
outs to like other people doing cool stuff. I'm so sorry that that's three big broad questions.
No, I love it. I mean, I feel like I said this a little bit earlier too, but like the I don't know, I mean like I cry like every day, you know? And sometimes I cry because things are so scary and sad, and sometimes I cry because I'm just overwhelmed by like the love that people have, and I've just been seeing people who like I think so much about like the one protester on the bridge. You know,
Yeah,
like every time I drive, there's like one protester holding an ice out sign over the bridge, you know? And I'm just thinking about like that one person, and like we need the protests that have 100,000 people at them. That is important. That absolutely matters. And I think about the ways in which like resistance right now feels like it's been like woven into the fabric of our communities. And it feels like everybody everywhere, you know, is doing something. And so like I just want to say like don't underestimate the power of like putting a sign in your yard. Don't underestimate the power of like connecting with your neighbors. You know, if you don't have a whistle, get a whistle, you know, get the nice little zine. I feel like Kyle, you probably have it on your website or something. Somewhere people can get that little how to use your whistle zine. Yeah. Um, yeah, so like doing something and thinking a lot about how that something is like being used to bring material help to people. I'm thinking a lot about the need right now in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota as a whole of like and like maybe this is too controversial of an opinion to put on the internet right now. But if what you have to offer this moment is an opinion or an addition to the discourse, think about how that opinion will help people get groceries. You know, like think about how you can use that to actually help people who are like literally too scared to leave their homes, and like local businesses that have had to like shut down for weeks, you know? Like I don't know. This is turning into like a long rambling thing, and I don't know exactly what people see on the news, but
yeah.
it's affecting every aspect of life here, you know?
This, I mean, not to be too on the nose, but that's also, you're kind of pointing to a poetry technique too, or a tactic where, like, yes, the big kind of big picture philosophy, theory of change, political statement or opinion, like that can matter. That can like have ripple effects and make a difference, or like, be something that matters. But you got to put a human face on it. Like you can't lose track of kind of the human element to all of this. And so I love that. Again, that's a thing we talk about in poetry classes, but it's also a thing that people who are just trying to navigate this moment and show up and like help out as best they can should not lose track of. That it isn't just about like I'm on this side or that side of the debate. It's like how are we helping each other? How are we actually showing up in ways that matter for each other?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like sharing ideas can't be
Yeah.
part of that. You know, I just think a lot about like psychologically what's motivating, and I'm thinking about like hierarchy of needs, you know what I mean? And I want all my neighbors to have food, you know, at like more than one thing can happen at the same time. And also like I just see this need here is like so big, you know, it's like such a big need. And I don't know. You think piece from LA. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to be mean.
Well, that is, I mean, this event, this kind of asynchronous event we're having is also a fundraiser, and so I will re-share that fundraiser link somehow, like whether in the info box or as text right here. And will keep hopefully all this like talk of poetry and stuff. I mean, one level, hopefully it can be immediately useful to people who are out there, whether you are a poet and you're writing about what's happening, or you're like an organizer and your job is to give a speech at the next event. Like I think some of these tactical considerations that we've been talking about, the stuff about craft, can be immediately relevant to people who are just public speakers or even writing like an op-ed or letter to the editor in the newspaper or posting on social media or whatever. Like that's kind of what this series is about, like thinking of sharing those like tactical considerations. um yeah, hopefully that can be useful, and then hopefully the poems like speak to your heart a little bit as well at the same time, because it's like you said, it's everything all at once. um
Yeah. Okay, can I say one more thing? I know we're getting kind of long.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but the one thing I want to say about like kind of like why craft matters in this moment, when I'm writing poetry, when I'm teaching about writing poetry, my goal is to emotionally connect with the audience as much as possible. And the reason that that emotional connection matters is because then you have a bridge across difference. And I think about especially like I said, I grew up in rural Minnesota. We did not have a lot of diversity of any kind, you know, and then I came to college in the Twin Cities and it was a big eye opener for me. And slam poetry was one of the first things that I came into where I was really exposed to like other people's stories and other people's lived experiences and getting to experience their lives and stories through this like effective emotional connection
Mm,
was like one of the best ways for like getting to actually see people as people, you know, as real people with complicated, very varied lives that are like just as important as yours. And so like when I think about the power of poetry, that's like one of the things that I always turn to again, you know, and just like humanizing people in your heart and really feeling, you know, feeling that stuff.
yeah, that's a great note to end on, and thank you so much for your work and for sharing what you've shared here and your work even beyond this moment and beyond your poetry. Like, yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Yeah, and I mean, I have to throw it back to you. I feel like you do way more work than me, but I just appreciate it so much. And like your practical, like how do artists engage in this moment? Like I literally looked at that before I wrote this poem and before I
Mm,
posted this poem. And if I had not looked at that, I don't know if I would have thought to provide a direct link to
mm,
support. And so like that reminder like was awesome and really helpful and like I can't track exactly how much money this poem raised, but like a lot of people saw it and some of those people gave money.
yeah.
So it matters.
Well, that's very affirming. Yeah, thank you. And then we can, Part two, a conversation with Isha Camara.
Wait, I go right now.
Oh, sorry.
All
Yeah, I
right,
was
that's you're
saying
gonna get action.
action.
Perfect.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
The children are on lockdown. The children I give papers to, we do test essays. They tell me about their favorite movies. They're on lockdown. From who? Who do we shut our blinds to? Lock our doors from? The ghouls? The clawed fang monsters? No. Then who? Who do we shield our brother's eyes and hold our sisters close from? Do we fear darkness? Do we fear where the light does not go? No. We are hiding from our government again. We are hiding from their cloaked faces and fast guns. We, the people of two cold winters, corner store rab beef, we of 11,842 lakes, because of course it isn't 10,000. Of course, we honor the smaller bodies of waters and name them ours, the skies. Their waters are indeed sweeter, us timid and strange and soft with all our Minnesota cold. And yesterday, our snow was covered in the blood of a mother, a poet, a civilian. Edit. I wrote this on January 8th. I wrote this before they killed Alex and arrested Dawn and Miss Georgia, before the boy and his nervous face appeared on my screen in his little hat. I wrote this, ignorant of such cruelty, or disbelieving of this future cruelty. I wrote this, and now my poems grow hands and small mouths and teeth and toes, limbs outstretched to capture my emptiness, to form my desolation from a sound mind. I am not sound. Miss Renee was 37, a transplant from Kansas City. I wonder what drew her up north. Must be our lakes, as stated, of course. Did she smell the sweetness? Or maybe she saw one of our sunsets. Did she ever get ramen off of 34th and Nicollet? Did she take her kids to the Mia? What if we met, passed one another at open mic, two writers in the night who knew and honored the secrets of this weird language? What was her favorite lip color? I'm sure she would have shared it with me, whispered it like some offhand offering. You know, the cold usually keeps the bad people out. Why didn't it keep all that bad out yesterday and the day before that? All this January, this below negative temperature, and what of last year in 2014, in 2020, in 2024, in 2023, what of 2021 for Dante and George, for Philando and Amir? Why can't we keep all that bad out?
Wow. Thank you for that. I remember I had read an earlier draft, and so like listening to it now, there's you, not to project too much, but I feel like I see how your mind is working in terms of where those edits came from and like
Yeah,
how it pushes the poem even more forward. And like I said, I'll share a few just observations again in the spirit
yeah,
of kind of like a poetry workshop for people who don't have access to that. Like, why do certain poems work? Like to me, this piece of writing like works. It
mm,
moves me in a way that a poem that I just kind of like agree with or like. It's just a fundamentally different experience. And I'm trying to write down some notes about why I feel like this poem works. And what came to mind for me was there are certain things I think poems can do that other kinds of common communication in a crisis political moment just don't do, right? Like if you are an activist, you're working for like an immigrant-led organization, your job in a specific moment might be to convey information as clearly and succinctly as possible. That's like a job, and that's what you're trying to do, and that's good. If you're an influencer or a streamer or whatever, like your job might be to like get as much attention as possible. And like,
yeah,
there's good that comes with that, but there's also a lot of bad that can come with that. And I think what a poet can do is neither of those things. It's something else. It's like one, there's a lot of questions in this poem. Like the poem is built, at least how I heard it, it's built around questions more
mm,
than statements. And I feel like poetry can give us a place to like it can challenge us to reflect and like
mm,
actually sit and ask these kinds of questions versus me being on stage being like I have all the answers, everybody listen to me, I'm so smart, right? It's a different kind of thing that it's asking of the audience. I also noticed that like and maybe this is obvious, but I think it's worth saying too that like a poem can ground us in the human like side of these like big political issues. So, like, there are people who are looking in from outside of Minneapolis or Minnesota, and they see this as like a debate, as like a political debate about immigration policy or whatever. And like that's important too.
yeah,
But I think one of the functions of poets is to never ever lose sight of the human side of this, the specificity, the like zooming in on a real human being's life and the specific things that they did. um, and that matters. I think sometimes there's a notion, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm going to throw it
mm,
back to you in a second. Sometimes there's
mhm,
a notion that like poems have to be relatable, and in order to be relatable, you have to keep them kind of vague so people can like project onto them. And I assume you're going to agree with me on this that like
yeah,
it's the opposite. It's like the more specific you are, the idea of like the lip color moment or going to the MIA, right? Like those really, really specific things make it real, and people then
mhm,
connect to the realness of it, not to like I see myself in it.
mhm,
And yeah, I think the poem does that really, really well. And then the last little note here, again, kind of an obvious one, but worth saying, like it tells the truth, right? Like a poem can tell a wholer kind of truth than just like the PowerPoint presentation truth. Um, I think in the conversation with Ollie earlier, we talked about Gwendolyn Brooks' term, like verse journalism, like
Mhm.
poets as journalists, kind of like telling the story of a particular moment. And I feel like this piece tells the story of the last, month here
Mhm.
as well as anything that I've come across. So thank you for
Yeah, thank
that.
you.
But yeah, I wanted to throw it back to you just in terms of just like processy kind of questions, like as you were writing it, um, you know, were you thinking, quote unquote strategically, or were you just like, I got to get this out, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, we come from this slam background, right? So things don't necessarily in first drafts look like
Mhm.
sonnet, look like prose. This is in my notes app still, and then, you know, there is this like online version for everyone to kind of have access to. Um, and it looks a mess, right? Like there's like things that I don't want to forget about, like her face,
Yeah.
right? Like and how we are at Reverb Open Mic, and she just could have been one of those people in the crowd, right? Giving feedback and things like that. I think, as you said, like not forgetting the human through all of this language, and through this digital landscape as well, too. I think I was thinking a lot about questions because we, if you think about the um how people are being interrogated, it's just a bunch of questions that they're supposed to have the right
Yeah.
answer to. If you think about the questions that our students are asking us, do we have class today? Do we have to go in person? Can I send this online? Do I have to tell you if I'm not going to come in, my mom? Like they're asking us questions. I'm supposed to have answers. The answers that I had January 6th have completely changed the answers that I have now that it's February 2nd. So I
Yeah.
think I was thinking about these questions of like, also, I have family who live outside of Minnesota and family who live outside of the States. And they're like, so what do you mean when they say they're picking people off the streets? How do I answer that? What is the difference between taken versus abducted versus missing versus gone? So I think the questions were to also ground my mind in what I was even feeling or thinking, right? And then people ask, why Minnesota? My answer is, why not Minnesota, right? If the agenda is suppression, if the agenda is to misrepresent the groups of people that are here, why not? So then, you know, what do we know Minnesota of? What do I know Minnesota of? And then, yeah, like if you're scrolling on Instagram, it is this endless loop of information. Whether, like you said, it's a podcaster, an influencer, whether it's Don Lemon, who is now doing his own independent journalism, whether it's me and you who are in community and we're like, we want to try to get this information to people as quick as possible, right? Whether it's these cards, right, that I'm
Yeah.
handing out to people so they can have information on them. Did you learn your amendments when you were in high school? And it's kind of just like in the back of your brain. Are you currently learning your amendments now in this moment? So then that's how it felt writing this poem, right? That I would write a line and then I'm like, wait, y'all need to know this. So I have to add this other line. And then like, here's this private secret that I have with this person I never met. How do you honor somebody you don't know? Um, am I saying the right things about this person? And then am I saying right things about the people that we've lost before too, that are unwilling martyrs, right? And so I think it's messy and I think that's okay. I think
Yeah.
there's a version that I own that no one will ever see. And then there's this version that lives online, because I do believe that art should be accessible. And then there's this version that exists between me and you. And I think that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
it's not meant to then be this colossal thing that's engraved in stone and, you know. Yeah.
I love the messiness or the chaos of how you describe that process of like the feeling of needing to write something and the idea of what you write and the many iterations of that and then where it goes in the world and how it lives in the world and like again it's like it's easy to fall into a perfectionism as an artist or
Yeah.
as an organizer as an activist and particularly in kind of the online age, but to be able to model that, like one, that like the writing itself, it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be honest, it can be incomplete, it can be formed out of questions, and that's all completely valid. And if anything, that there's a truth in that is maybe even deeper than like I have all the answers. But then
Mhm.
two, you touch on how like the poem can have different functions for different audiences. Like on one hand, for people who don't know what's going on, it can help kind of at least open a door for them to want to know what's going on. For people who do know what's going on, it's affirming, right? Like I heard this poem. It's not like a happy, positive poem, but I felt affirmed in it. And it was
Yeah.
like my experience that I'm having right now over the last month, like I'm not alone in that. And like that matters. And then also, so the outside people, the inside people, and then for you as like a human being yourself, like being able to write it as a way to process what's going on. Like that's another really important function of poetry. It isn't just to like convince other people to be better people or whatever. Like there's all this other stuff that it can do.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And like, I don't, yeah, like you said, like, I don't leave this being like, well, my job is done.
Yeah.
Like, I think a poet's job is never done. And I was talking to so many people, right? Because it's almost like the thing you have to talk about, and then you go on with your day. Um, and we were just talking about what roles, right? Like we have had organizers that have been protecting communities since July, because this was there for them in July of last year, right? But it's imploded and exploded in a really particular way this month. And I was like, I just hope that I'm a poet in every lifetime, right? Like these are the tools that I have at my disposal. Um, and I hope that, we are insistent on like truth telling. And in my MFA, I wrote an essay about poets and prophets having the same function, right? That they are messengers of their time, right? And a prophet's function is to deliver this message from this higher power, right? This bridge between the humanness in them connecting to the humanness of humanity, and then us trying to translate like what God is doing upstairs. And poets have that same desire for translation, that same desire for record keeping, that same desire for storytelling, right? To bring people in closer around the fire. And so I think that function, as you mentioned, is very necessary. It keeps us warm, right? And it keeps the fire going. So motherfuckers are burnt out by the end of the month. You have a poet to like renable, and you have a poet to stabilize us, I think, right?
Yeah.
Through nuance, through language. So if that's my job, it's a hefty one, but I'll do it.
It's such a good transition. I want to ask you because you said you had some prompts and stuff too. I want to get to that in a second, but like again, for people watching this, whether you watch it in like, I don't know, mid-February, whenever we actually get it out, like the thing I did in January was this big virtual event and like resource on what can artists offer beyond our art. So like how do we use the platforms, the audiences, the skills we have access to like kind of concretely, practically support movement work. So it was stuff like, fundraising and like amplifying movement calls to action and like the things that we can do as poets that have nothing to do with writing poems. But then everything that you just said is such a good reminder that like that is an important part of the conversation, but like the poetry is also an important part of the conversation, and like it
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
matter. And we don't have to talk about what's more important. It's not a competition, but like I think the way that you frame that was very profound. And I guess in that spirit, if there are poets watching this conversation right now, you want to
Mhm.
share a little something
Yeah.
for them?
And I might give this to you like in
Yeah, I
a
can
in
share a
a
link or
format
whatever.
that you can form it out. But I really love color. I love color so much. And I think color has an ability to say something when language fails us, right? Like when your mind is a mess, you can perform or insist on a certain color to relay that emotion or feeling. So obviously like red is oftentimes this kind of stark territorial color, but also it's the color of our stop signs, it's the color of our exits, right? It draws attention. Where purple is a color of both royalty and loyalty, right? And it's how we connect people. So I have these six colors: red, yellow, green, blue, purple, and pink. And each of them have a quote that somebody has spoken about this color. So Alice Walker writes, I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and do not notice it. So it's so good, right? So I love all of these quotes by their writers, their authors, their just celebrities, or some of them are actors. And then each, depending on what color you choose, you get a particular prompt. So in the spirit of purple, if you did not have a heart, what would grow in its place? And then if that question feels really weird, I have some bullet points where they're just, like you mentioned, more questions. So, where did your heart go? Are you the one who removed it, or did somebody else remove it for you? Right?
Mm,
Um, it could be, example, a home with, quote, no one in it. It could be an animal that you are, quote, feeding. Um, so you pick a question color, you get a prompt, you get some extra questions because I love questions. Um, so like I said, I can send this to you in some type of
yeah.
document or format, and they're just easy. Maybe you aren't very inspired by the question that I actually have, but you're actually more inspired by the quote. Vincent van Gogh writes, "Yellow is capable of charming God." And I love that so much, especially with his particular history of yellow. So maybe
Mm.
you care less about the prompt that I give you and more about Vincent van Gogh and his life and his dedication to sunflowers, his dedication to the color yellow. So then you write a poem about dedication, and that's all right too.
I love that. I have such a different relationship to like writing prompts and stuff that like it kind of boggles my mind when someone is good at this format of writing prompts. And like I'm excited to see this resource, and I'm sure people listening to this will get something out of it too.
So
Um,
happy to give that. And it's just fun. And also, if you get a color and you don't like that prompt, feel free to switch your color. Like, that's okay.
yeah. Um, I was wondering, so I'm having, the handful of guests that we're having, we'll share a poem and then maybe share someone else's poem. You mentioned if they should come for us. I don't know
Yeah,
if you have that in front of you. I got the
yeah,
link here.
I too.
I can pull it. But yeah, if you want to maybe share that, because I've been like collecting um a bunch of links to local poems from the last, month
Mhm,
or so, and there's some really good ones. And like we talked about like Tish Jones, who we both know really well, performing at the Timberwolves game. Muna Abdullahi, Ed Bakali, a bunch of people are writing and kind of meeting this moment with some really good work. But I also, I kind of want them to be able to speak for themselves. So if we're gonna like bring someone else's voice, Ollie shared a couple of Andrea Gibson poems earlier. I think this one is one of the most appropriate poems for this
yeah,
moment too, even though it was written, I assume, years ago, right? Like
right.
quite a few years ago.
hmm I think what I really enjoy about this poem, because this was actually my freshman year of college when
Mm,
this collection came out, and it was extremely necessary for me because I was at Wisconsin Madison. It definitely felt like a culture shock in terms of values, like morals and values. I was like, okay, I am disaligned with this community, and what we value in terms of identity.
mm,
Um, and this poem comes out, and I think what enthralls me about this poem is the use of I, that
mm,
this person and poets in general, but this author is not writing from above, this omnipresent I see these people and here are all of these descriptions of these people, but is that the speaker is consistently, I claim, I run, I see you. So this author is in this communal space, right?
mm,
It's almost that this poem functions as a day in the life of this poet in this space. So the dedication to these people is magnified. So the last lines are just so simple, but it's I follow, I follow. Of course you do, because what else would you do throughout this whole work? Like, so I think it's so easy. So I think as a Minnesotan, I have a dedication to Minnesotans. I have a dedication to the 612. Um, so of course I am of these people. I'm amongst these people. I know these folks, and they know me too.
it's such an important counterpoint to what we talked about a second ago about how like the poetry does matter and like telling our stories and imagination, like all that stuff is important. At the same time, like a pet peeve of mine is like poets are not wizards. We're not like
Yes,
magical and
yes,
like
yes,
above
yes,
everyone like commenting on it. Like yeah, like you're saying, we are of the people, we are in the people, and like that
yeah,
matters. So would you be down to just to read this
yes, of
for
course.
people who, yeah, go ahead. The title, author, poem.
Mhm. If They Should Come for Us by Fatima Asghar. These are my people, and I find them on the street and shadow through any wild, all wild, my people, my people. a dance of strangers in my blood, the old woman's sari dissolving to win, Bindi, a new moon on her forehead. I claim her my kin. And so the star of her to my breast, the toddler dangling from stroller hair, a fountain of dandelion seed at the bakery. I claim them too. The sick uncle at the airport who apologizes for the pat down, the Muslim man who abandons his car at the traffic light, drops to his knees at the call of the azan, and the Muslim man who sips good whiskey at the start of Maghrib, the lone kala at the park, pairing her kurta with Crocs, my people, my people. I can't be lost. When I see you, my compass is brown and gold and blood. My compass, a Muslim teenager, snapback and high tops gracing the subway platform, mashallah. I claim them all. My country is made in my people's image. If they come for you, they come for me too. In the dead of winter, a flock of aunties step out on the sand. Their patas turn to the ocean. A colony of uncles grind their palms and 1,000 jasmine bells. The air, my people, I follow you like constellations. We hear the glass smashing the street and the nights opening their dark our names, this country's wood for the fire, my people, the long years we've survived, the long years yet to come. I see you, map, my sky, the light, your lantern, long ahead, and I follow. Man, and it
Like,
has no period, right?
oh yeah.
So this is forever. This
So I want
lane.
to I want to give you the last word on this poem. But like,
Hmm.
one, like, this isn't even your poem, but you performed it so well. And like, the fact that there's no period, there's this kind of like movement in it, a momentum kind of, and it's easy to just like bulldoze through it. But like the little bit of restraint as a performer, right? Like the little bit of restraint, the little bit of like patience while still like acknowledging and respecting that bigger momentum, like just perfect performance. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
a beautiful piece, and I think the thing that really jumps out at me is just aside from any kind of in the weeds poetry, like craft stuff, like on a line by line level, is
yeah, yeah,
tone, right? This idea of an anthemic piece of writing that is not just like happy, happy, everything's great, but is always pointing us in the direction of like the agency that we have, or like the solidarity that we have. Like the world is not a happy, perfect place. The world is a very terrible place in so many ways, but like we have each other. And like that tone, I think, is my favorite kind of quote unquote political writing. If you think, I know that's
yeah.
a controversial term in and of itself, but like
Hmm.
if we are
Hmm.
writing about or around things that are real, that are affecting our lives and our families, I love poems that have that tone. Like I'm going to acknowledge how very, very bad things are right now, but that's not going to be what the poem is about. There's this thing that is moving through the poem that I'm going to share with you, and we're going to go and fight this thing together. Like that defiance is so important, at least
Yeah,
for me.
yeah,
And like, yeah, in terms
yeah.
of like why this poem jumps out at you, or why you thought about it today.
I think like, and we started this by me asking you, how are you? And sometimes the simple things are the best, right? They're the most honest, right? Like I want to know that how are you in whatever language that you have that's available. And some might say like, why the Muslim teenager? Why the uncle at the airport? And to that, I say, why not? Right? Right? Like this community that Oscar is able to specify so deeply in color with nature their names, right?
Mm.
Um, and Fatima Asghar is an Asian Muslim American. I am a Gambian Muslim American, and I feel so deeply connected through this choice um, to make a portrait of this community, of this people. And as I said, like this, we can go line by line, but like it not ending on a period moves us forward. And I think it invites me as a poet to then write to Oscar, to write to my community. It's almost like ode to. Um, so then the story will never end. And to poets everywhere, your poem is never finished. I tend not to use that language. I know it's very specific and nuanced and woo-woo, but like there is the continual draft of my poems, right? The first, the second, the third, and then we are on the draft that we are reading, right? We are on the draft that we are dissecting, but there will be more after, whether syntax or enjambment or an M dash or whatever have you, right? Even like you said, the delivery of it would will change it to another draft of the poem.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned this before you read it, but the last line there of like the fact that the whole incredible piece builds and builds and builds and it lands on the phrase "I follow" and then it's repeated, "I follow, I follow."
Yeah.
Like I love finding the connections between a kind of creative writing practice and then like an activist practice, an organizer practice,
Yep.
and in
Yep.
both of
Yep.
those things, like I don't trust people who set themselves up as the authority. Like, listen to me, I'm so great, I'm so smart. But like the idea that I follow, like we serve the people, we follow the people, we are part of the people, and we're all leaders too. But like leadership is diffused, and
Yep.
we have to
Yep.
follow each other. Like, it's so good.
And critical text, right? Like pedagogy of the oppressed, right?
Yeah,
And one chapter specifically dedicated to the idea of objects and subjects. And to
yeah,
believe that I went to a school and got a degree in this shit, so then I become the subject that all other objects desire to become is a falsehood that
mm,
no writer should fall into. Like it's a trap, right? Every day, my this whole moment to me is informed by my littles. They are 15 through 21 and consistently in their showing up, submitting homework, telling me about their day. They just broke up with their boyfriend. They don't know how to read their praise stuff. I am informed by what they know and what they don't know, right? And without them, I don't even think I would be truly present.
yeah.
Um, but what do they know of poetry? You know, I tell them my job, my side gig, and they're like, they pay you for that? And I'm like, they do. So yeah.
Well, yeah, as we start to wrap up, but one, I just want to thank you again for your piece and for bringing this piece into the space too. But you know, we've been landing with the other guests on kind of just a pretty big, vague question of like, is there anything else that you want to shout out? Anything else that you want to share about stuff that's going on here in Minnesota? Because you know, this is people will watch this sooner than later. Resources or shout outs or fundraisers or like anything.
Yeah, so I have an event tomorrow, but I
Oh,
guess
wow.
maybe
Okay.
by the time this, yeah, okay, that's good. So Um, Moon Palace Books are offering supplies for folks that need it, anything from hand warmers to socks. They are open for the safety of all folks. And we just had our slam there. We love Moon Palace. And Tish said something really beautiful like, we're a nonprofit, we need the funds too, but if you had to pick, pick Moon Palace. And
Mm,
so, like thinking about where you put your money, but also where do you put your support and your resources and your time?
yeah.
Pick Moon Palace because they picked us. They always pick us. Um, Pride for Project and Living, their building is on the corner of Franklin and I'm blanking on the other place. I'll send you like the address,
Okay.
but they also have resources and supplies as well too. Um, and once again, it's like anything from diapers to hand warmers, things like that. I'm trying to think. I feel like I have a bunch in my brain,
Oh
but
no,
if
I mean if
I,
you want to think for a second, I can shout out that like it's
uh
cool that you name those two places because it's like one, if people need the stuff, like that's a place to go and like
yep,
that's really important. But then two, if people want to give, right? Like
yes,
that's
yes,
also
those are two
two
places to
good
give
things to have
to.
on your radar. Moon Palace has been such an incredible partner for many
Yep,
years for like all kinds of
all
programs and stuff.
kinds of stuff. And this, I do, once again, depends on when you put this out, but Reverb, we are doing Reverb Open Mic. That is a space for continuous support
Yeah,
as a writer. But then also, maybe you're not a writer, but you know some stuff about writing. You could be the audience member that supports someone else.
yeah,
Every Thursday, 6 to 8, Flavor Cafe off University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Um, and listen to your young people.
yeah.
Um, we are doing our slam season, you know how it goes, and they are the voices of the time. And I feel like we are more informed as a community when we know what our young people are on. We're about to do our slam over at Washburn, so our private slam at
Mm,
Washburn, and then we do our in-person one at Flava Cafe on February 13th. And slam season goes all the way till March.
Mhm.
Yes, end of the month. So if you're supporting a young person, that's where you go. Mhm.
Very cool. Thank you for
Anything
that.
else that comes up, I'll hit you up. But
Yeah. But no, thank you for all that, and thank you for your
thank
work.
you.
Part three, a conversation with Seymour perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of like when, like you'll be in a classroom or some space, and people will be like, kids will be like, oh, do you freestyle? You should freestyle for us. And it's like that's a beautiful part of the culture. And I'm here to like spit. I'm here to like
Yeah.
give you something I thought about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we could have fun, but it's like for me, that's like we're all kicking it, and it's like you know what I mean. That's like a party vibe. It's not.
You know what the B-boy, B-girl version of that is like they want you to spin on your head,
Yeah, yeah.
right? They just want you to spin on your head. They don't care about the technique and the
It's so
footwork. Like
true.
just spin on your head.
Yep. Yep.
But anyways, like I would love to before we get off on tangents talking about this stuff, I would love for you to share something. So whether you want to share
Yeah.
one of the, I know you have a couple of pieces potentially, and we could do all of them, but like whatever is on, whatever you're feeling, just to kick it off, and then I'll kind of share some observations about it, and then I'll throw it back to you about your process.
Okay. Cool. Word. Let me just pop this up real quick.
Yeah, and for people who might be listening, if they don't know you, and I'll do all the like framing introduction stuff in my own recording. I'll just do that.
Mhm.
But like the fact that you do, I wanted to talk to you partly because you do spoken word stuff and you do hip hop stuff like rapping. I mean, I'm producing too, but like those are two different kinds of writing, right? And I think they're both
Mhm.
interesting. And then also because you have experience workshopping and coaching and like kind of giving feedback to others who are writing. I think those three things together could make this an interesting conversation, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just so down to just dive in and get into it. Like, I love these conversations
Yeah.
and like every opportunity to have these conversations with, people um, who get it and who are, like you said, challenging themselves and continuing to think about how we're framing a thing, how we're putting it into the world. Um, but yeah, so um, someone who is a really thoughtful writer about how they engage um, with culture and society is Jose Olivares from Chicago, and I've been let's see, this came out in October of last year, and clearly remains to be relevant. It's called When We Win. The masked agents raid our neighborhoods. What did they cover up? Yesterday is their promise and their charge. On 75th and South Shore, they rammed down our doors using yesterday. They tossed canisters of yesterday into our children's lullabies. Why? My people, we carry today and tomorrow in twin holsters. We plant today and tomorrow in our gardens. Every day there are more sprouts. Let it be known. Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul will never cower. Yesterday already died. Yesterday is dying. Yesterday will die again. There is no future in yesterday. The agents in our neighborhoods hide their faces because they are losing, because they lost. When we win, there will be whistles from the gulls circling Lake Michigan. Let them sing it. Chicago is a city of today and tomorrow. Chicago is the future. Minneapolis is the future. St. Paul is the future. Of course, throw in some edits.
Yeah, so people don't know, like, the poem is super, super Chicago. Because
Yeah.
it's like you said, it's from a while ago when, obviously ICE and CBP are still everywhere, but like Chicago had its like Eye of Sauron moment
Yep,
months
exactly.
ago, and it actually inspired so much of our work here in the Twin Cities, right? And so
Absolutely.
I love that you're kicking off this conversation by sharing that the Jose Olivares poem, like, which is so good. So I'm going to share some observations just on
Cool.
a craft level, and then I want to throw it back to you about like why that poem sticks out to you.
Cool.
So there's interesting stuff here in that like a lot of the I come from like the spoken word slam poetry background. I don't know how he thinks about his relationship to spoken word or whatever, but like I know him as a a page poet, right? Someone who writes really good page poetry. But like, and part of it is your performance of these words, but like, there's so much energy in it, and I love the forward momentum and like on a structural level, the line "yesterday is their promise and their charge," and then throughout the whole poem, it's this or this contrast of like yesterday versus today, tomorrow, yesterday versus today, tomorrow, and it comes up in different ways. But like that's such
Mhm.
a it's such a simple and straightforward, but like powerful little language thing that he's doing in this poem.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, the other thing I wrote, and like, yeah, the other thing I wrote down is I mentioned this a little bit, but like, this, it's just so Chicago, and it's like attitude, and like,
Mhm.
I think attitude matters in this kind of work. It isn't just like how do you craft the beautiful lyric or whatever. It is,
Mhm.
and not even through the performance, but even just on the page, you can instill this like attitude, forward momentum. And the
Mhm.
term that I always come back to, and you know this, but like it's come up a couple times in these different conversations, is the idea of anthemic writing, where it's like
Mhm.
you don't turn away from the bad thing. Like
Mhm.
the very first line of this poem is like dark, right? And like bad things are happening. It's not about like, let's be positive and let's try our best. It's like,
Mhm.
we're going to acknowledge the bad thing and then we're going to punch it in the face, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't. What I love is it.
Metaphorically. Go ahead.
Yeah, and what I love about it is that it doesn't. It doesn't feel the need to dress it up
Yeah.
in a super poetic or poety, writerly way. It's like it's bad. It's bad enough as it is.
Mm.
And I think that that's something that's really cool about this piece too. But sorry, I couldn't help myself. I know you.
No, go ahead. If you want to take that and run with it, I think that's
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like that first line and that impact and how it hits me really carries through. It's not fanciful. It's
yeah.
not, it's like it's so full of love, but it's not really romantic.
Mm.
And like that's and it's that Chicago edge a little bit too, that's like this is what it is. And it's like sometimes we need to slow ourselves down and be like, okay, what is the thing? We need to just say what it is sometimes.
Yeah. So I was trying to take this kind of commentary, and if I were gonna boil it down, and like an aspiring or emerging writer,
Mm-hmm.
trying to take something from this conversation, because like that, what we're talking about is something that is hard to teach, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just got to do it. But I do think one thing I wrote down here was the idea of I think there is a stereotype or a misconception that poetry is about taking simple things and making them complicated and like
Yeah.
enshrouding them. But like this poem is such a good example of taking like a big, complicated, intimidating thing to write about and like clarifying it. Like the language is beautiful. I think this is really good poetry just from my like college boy like
Mm-hmm.
English major hat on. Like this is good poetry, but it
Mm-hmm.
also, like you said, it has a like relentless clarity to like it knows what it is, it knows what it's saying. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then so it's not even so it doesn't give us the opportunity as an audience um to view it as fanciful or out of reach when he says when we win,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
so grounded. That's just onward and forward from the reality, that's being reflected.
One
um
of those ways that form and content come together, right? We can talk about them as separate things, but that's a great example of how they are intimately related.
yeah, 100%. And it's that thing where it's like the relationship, that intimate relationship of those things is kind of like, so what we're always looking for,
Mm,
instead of like trying to include these two things in a
yeah.
bullet list of things that we're supposed to have to make good poetry or whatever.
That's how I write.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to point out again, we're talking about like just helpful kind of tools. And as always, I always say like tools, not rules, not anything that you have to do, but like something that's nice to think about. This poem's really short, right? I don't know if it took you just like a minute or whatever to read it. Like on the page, it's not a super long poem, and I
Yeah.
do think that brevity matters because I'm partly this conversation. I'm thinking about not just what is when I read a poem, what makes me like it. It's also what is if I see it on the internet, what's going to make me stop and read it. And I think it being shorter helps with that, for better or worse. I also think about like at a rally or at an action,
Hmm.
and someone gets up to read a poem, what's
Hmm.
going to make me kind of roll my eyes versus what's going to make me kind of tune in. And some of it is like it doesn't go on for 5 minutes, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
go on for 10 minutes. It's
That's a long time. That's a long time. And it's kind of like I say too, like even in classrooms, sometimes I'm like, so there's an excerpt from that piece.
yeah,
It's a longer piece, but you would all have to really be excited about poetry and want to be here for me to like, feel like that's okay taking up your time with that. You know what I mean? Not that it's not valuable, but I'm trying
that
to like,
no.
we're trying to move, especially at a
The
rally.
the excerpting or whatever is so real because I can imagine someone watching us have this conversation and be like, well, we should be encouraging
Mhm.
students to like want to engage with longer poems, and like we do that, but there
Yeah.
are moments where like because you are in the classroom and you are in relationship with these kids that like
Mhm.
the excerpt is the way to go
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, and it's diversity of tactics,
Yeah, exactly.
and it's like, because different groups have different vibes, and I think it's our job, and this goes out to the more profound of, the role of the artist, but it's like to be aware,
Yeah,
and to kind of reflect back to people that like we see them, you know, and then act accordingly.
totally. So we can keep talking about this poem if there's other stuff you want to pull out of it, but I'd also love to hear one of your pieces from the
Sure.
last few weeks
Yeah,
if you're down.
yeah, absolutely. Let me pull one of those up.
And I will, while you do that, just, whenever a guest in this conversation reads someone else's poem, I will link to it. You can go read it yourself.
Cool.
That piece is freely available online.
Hmm. Yeah, super
And
dope.
he has, Jose Olivares has a bunch of really good poems too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I was gonna say I didn't say enough about him really. Super dope poet, Chicago poet. I think his first book was Citizen Illegal. Phenomenal. I've been carting this around with me to carting. I'm not carting it, but I've been toting it around with me um, to classrooms, for the last year or so. He just came out with a new one. Also looks brilliant. Um, really really one of those like important voices of our time, I would say.
yeah.
But cool. Let's see.
So
I like to read this without saying the title, actually, if that's
I
okay.
think that's smart. I think I know what you're gonna do.
Cool. That morning, frosted like windshield on the inside, we trusted our senses, took our time. A left, a while, a right, a slow down U-turn, post up, back around the other way. We found you, crumpled spiders, acting in multiple cars for blocks as we honked, whistled, watched, and informed our neighbors while you hid with all the absurdity of a cartoon ostrich with its head in the sand. 4 hours bent out of shape and time, you tried to infect us with your knots, but we are too many, too connected, too frequent, too slick. You stick out and smell like an open wound. We will pour the salt in as your hollow shadow of a soul screeches out of our home and back to the desolate absence you sodden from. Your family, if you have any, gone, ashamed, informed. You broken, scraped, melted down the drain. Spring is coming.
Yeah. I love this piece. I know I think I read it whenever you posted. It was just like a week ago. I don't know when people are watching this, but
Mhm.
in the middle of everything happening, this piece jumped out at me because I really I don't know if this is a longer tangent or if I keep it focused on your poem specifically, but I really appreciate how mean this poem is.
Mhm.
And like mean in the sense of it being just kind of venomous and like I think that that is a narrative battle that is worth fighting and worth winning. That like
Mhm.
on a narrative level, like a narrative organizing level, narrative interventions and stuff. The idea that you know there was a narrative battle being fought between who are the monsters here, and like
Mhm.
obviously we're here in the Twin Cities. We know exactly who the monsters are and like who's kidnapping kids and using kids as bait and shooting people and spraying people in the face and punching people's car windows. Like we know that there's a whole other population of people who are like, oh, the weirdos are those protesters who keep showing
Mhm.
up and screaming at these guys who are just trying to do their jobs. And like,
Mhm.
so I think somewhat like one role of poetry is can just be one more kind of voice, one more effort to push that narrative battle where we want it to be, that like we're just neighbors looking out for each other. And I think that's explicit in the poem. Like we're just
Mhm.
regular people doing what we think is right to connect to each other and like show up for each other and be there for each other. And the
Mhm.
weirdos, right? The ghouls, the crumpled spiders are these like federal agents coming in here.
Mhm.
And I think
They are. It's weird. It's so weird. Like, you see a picture of somebody grabbed on a street somewhere, and it's like they're like in the shadow with the mask. It's like it's really something. It's really something. And then yeah, like I don't know. I don't want to go on too much, but
I'll just start the couple other observations I had is again the use of we rather than I. Like I think that's again a simple thing, but for people out there who are trying to write political poems, like
Mhm.
we is a very powerful word. It changes the flavor of a piece of writing, even if the overall message is the same. Using
Mhm.
we language, us language versus I language, and
Mhm.
then the thing that came to mind for me is, and this has come up in a million different pop culture areas. I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the original is from Watchmen, the scene where Rorschach is like, um, I'm not locked in here with you, you're all locked in here with me.
Mhm.
And there's a tonal thing that this poem does really well is that like it sets up us, right, as the people, as the neighbors, as the community members, as the thing that should be feared. And I
Mhm.
love that. I love that. Again, on a narrative level, the fact that the last line is spring is coming, and that is in 99 out of 100 other poems would be like this beautiful kind of nature image of like spring is coming and the flowers are blooming, but like the spring is coming here is so threatening and like strong. And I just, yeah, there's something that this poem does that I just really appreciate.
Mm. Well, and there's some it connects to these broader ideas too. I think of like, like oh well, life isn't all sunshine and butterflies, kids. It's like, do you know what is happening to make the sun be a thing? Like what? That's not cute. This is like like
Sunshine
the
butterflies.
yeah, and like butterflies like melt. You know,
Oh,
they
in their cocoon.
they melt and like reconfigure, and but neurons of memory continue into the new form. So they remember melting inside of the cocoon.
I mean,
And
that's an element of this poem that someone listening to our conversation won't hear. But like when you look at this on Instagram, I do want to point out that it's black text on the kind of monarch butterfly orange. I don't know how intentional that was, but like that that like communicates something that I think is also really cool.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like, and unless you're in a place that's this cold for this long,
Yeah.
you there's just so much you can understand about how much strength it takes for a first day of spring, and for the land and to see it grow from the hard cold, and it's the reality. It's
Yeah.
tundra. You know what I mean? It's not on the surface, right? And so the when spring comes, that's an act of immense power.
Yeah. It's such a good line to land on too. Because I joked about it a second ago about how like it's normally would be this thing about like life and butterflies, but like it is though too. Like it is this kind of
Well,
strong like
yeah.
promise to the powers that be that like we will not be defeated. Like spring is coming, but spring as an image does relate to life, and how much of our situation has been backdropped by the fact that it is the dead of winter. It is one of the coldest winters that I remember here in Minnesota. And like being outside, feeling your fingers freeze, like feeling your face freeze, like has been again like intertwined with this other experience of standing up to the fascists and like showing up with your neighbors and all that stuff. And yeah,
Facing the cold.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess there's more, like I could keep talking about this poem
Mm-hmm.
forever, but like just the we are too many, too connected, too frequent. And like there's an edit that you made just now that isn't in the text here that I thought was really cool. The slick that goes then
Mm-hmm.
you stick out. Like just a little, poetry thing to like move the language around that or move the language through that I think does really well, that this does really
Mm-hmm.
well. And then yeah, I think the thing I wanted to pull from this was mostly just the tone question. And it relates, I mean, some of the stuff also comes up in your song, Salt of the Earth, which I don't know if you want to share that too, but like I can talk
Oh
about
yeah.
it really briefly while you bring it to mind. But like
Yeah.
that song has also stuck out to me as my kind of personal little anthem of the past month because yeah, there's a ton of good music coming from the Twin Cities, a ton of people writing about what's happening. But like this one, I think does some of the stuff we've been talking about really well, in that it's also kind of mean, it's also kind of venomous, but that's in the verses, right? And then the hook is this beautiful affirmation of community using, again, we statements versus I statements, and even just the phrase like salt of the earth as a phrase people have probably heard before. You kind of throw it around, it's like an idiom or whatever.
Mhm.
And you know, obviously there's the salt melts ice aspect of it, but like
Mhm.
salt of the earth, again, like we're just the people. We're just, you know, sometimes we are protesters, to use that specific word, but a lot of
Mhm.
times we're just in our neighborhood showing up and trying to like
Mhm.
help out and just salt of the earth. And we've seen so much of that in Minnesota over the past month, of people who maybe haven't been involved in organizing before but
Mhm.
know so clearly that what is happening is very, very wrong, that they're showing up, these like salt of the earth types.
Mhm. Mhm. They're showing up with casserole. They're
Yeah.
showing up, you know, like in all of these ways, and it's so brilliant to me. And I want to try to keep reminding ourselves that it doesn't have to stop here.
Yeah.
Like this is the way the world can be. Like we really do. Like, and you know, even when things, you know, shut down earlier in the pandemic, and like the CO2 levels all changed around the world,
Mm.
like crazy stuff, and it was like those are things we can do,
Yeah.
you
The
know.
better world that we want to live in is not 300 years away. It's
Mm-mm.
like very close.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want it and we fight for it, like we can have that world.
Mm-hmm. And you know, like continents shift, you know, and like shit happens.
That's deep. That's poetic.
To be as deep as I can, thank you. Yeah. All right, so I'll shift to salt of the earth here.
Yeah, sure.
Um, should I should I play music with it, or should I
I mean,
just
I was thinking acapella, we can really focus on the
Okay,
words,
that's what I thought.
but
Okay,
like
cool.
whatever.
No, perfect.
I want to let people know this is a song though. You can go get this on Bandcamp. It's a really
Mhm.
good song. The beat also has, just on a tonal level, I feel like supports the language really well.
Thank you. All right. More noise. We don't go quiet. We spit sparks to light the Gaian sense. The highest minded concept is lower than low. Know and behold, global patrol, scope for control. Madmen in their little angry dudes, stomping around like they had never prayed in pews. Which is fine, unless your whole things are supposed to. Greed and violence aren't what your God says to get close to. Show of force, cosplay, cowardice. No face schools flexing on the powerless. Look a demon directly in the abyss. Show your eyes so they can see what they can kiss. In Minnesota, we don't need to be nice. We can get salty on the streets of de-ice. Get loud and observe, be cautious, alert. We can melt ice with the salt of the earth. Yo, what kind of shit for brain sinks it would be fun? You'd have to be hollow, would have to be numb to join the mass ranks of those to defund. I mean, abolish, otherwise would be dumb. Like volunteer and soul to succumb. Bubbling in sludge, it's about to become. Slid down the cracks like a water slide, both hands up like you were not about to die, rushing with voices online that could care less about the state of your spirit or its progress. On God, what a mess to glob onto, head far gone from the toxic fumes, all due to the want to prove. Imagine masculinity of a toxic crew. Look in the eye of a demon, no fear. I am not afraid, holding up a sacred mirror. Yes, in Minnesota, we don't need to be nice. We can get salty on the streets to de-ice. Get loud and observe, be cautious, alert. We melt ice with the salt of the earth. Get loud and observe, be cautious, alert. Calm and assured, don't stop till the cowards disperse. Get loud and observe, be cautious, alert. Calm and assured, don't stop till the powers dispersed.
I that the very ending about like don't stop till the cowards disperse, and then don't stop until the powers disperse. Like there's cool like language stuff there. I also like that you didn't do a whole verse about it, but just that you brought in the masculinity piece of it at the end of the second verse and like how deeply that is like informing everything that's happening here. And it might not be at the surface of like the commentary or the way that, how people understand what's happening via the news or whatever, but like it is impossible to understand the federal invasion of Minnesota without understanding its connection to like masculinity and like
Mhm.
it isn't even to say that all the agents are men, but like this deep like very dominant narrative vision of masculinity. The clip,
Yeah.
and I don't want to just sit here and like, did you see this? Did you see that? But like, I do think one of the most things that's really stuck with me is the clip of the guy filming the agent who says, "If you raise your voice, I'll erase your voice."
Mhm.
It's like it was so masculine in the sense that it was a guy trying to be tough. It was
So
not a
hard.
tough guy. It was not a guy who was tough. It was the guy
Yeah.
trying to be tough and like,
Yeah. He was like a dorky dude looking in the
yeah,
mirror, coming up with a stupid little
yeah,
saying he could
yeah.
tell the protesters.
Or saw it on a meme somewhere or something.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Exactly.
And like, you take that little instance, to put our poetry hats on, you take that one little very, very specific thing, but step back and see how that, in a broad sense, is like what is happening here.
Mhm.
Both,
And I think that's why it's hard for people to outside of it, and even people who are witnessing it who may not be joining the massive chorus yelling ice out. But I think people who haven't interrogated their own relationship to the patriarchy, to abusive dynamics that are it's an abusive relationship that we have with our nation.
yeah,
There's this beautiful album by Salt. It's a really brilliant group. They dropped something like last week. It's life-giving. Check it out. I think it's called One, oddly enough. And they have a bunch of them, but brilliant. One of the lines that sticks out for me on that is, uh, "You're my protector, but I'm your survivor."
mm. Oh wow,
And so it's so important for us to connect those dots. To connect the dots from this to Palestine to AI. You know, and it's how all really insidiously intertwined it is.
yeah,
And they make so many of these things seem benign when they're really feeding a driving cultural force that's eating people alive.
yeah. And I mean, and what better way to push back than art? Like I mentioned this before, but since our last event was all about like not so much the artsy stuff, about like
Mm-hmm.
the practical ways we can show up as
Mm-hmm.
artists.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it is worth affirming that like art itself and like expression and storytelling and
Mm-hmm.
community that we build through expression and storytelling like
Mm-hmm.
is one of the primary, I don't know if I should use the word weapon or like maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's another word there, like tool or whatever, that we have to fight back against that.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Because it's communication. And so what like we can have too much information. There can be a lot too many voices, but we can't have too many people communicating to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about like the space of the open mic or
Mm-hmm.
like the poetry slam or like the cipher like outside the show, which
Mm-hmm.
maybe a more common thing when we were younger, but I'm sure it still happens
For
sometimes,
sure. Yeah.
right? The little cipher outside the 7th Street entry or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just all those spaces where people are modeling or practicing this kind of like openness and vulnerability and togetherness with each other. And it is easy, I think, for certain people, and we all hold different identities and come to this conversation in different ways. It's easy, I think, for some people to see that as like this woo-woo thing, or like to use that term as like a very like a soft power, like not really important kind of thing. But like
Yeah.
in a moment where the our enemies are trying to isolate us and
Mm-hmm.
trying very hard with resources and billions of dollars behind it to alienate us from each other and
Mm-hmm.
get us all to think that we are all just like isolated individuals who can only
Mm-hmm.
express ourselves from like what we shop for or whatever. Like the fact that
Mm-hmm.
people still go to the open mic, the Reverb open mic every Thursday night at Flavor Cafe at 6 o'clock, or still go to Buck Slam, or still go to the Reentry Labs Better Things series, or still go to any kind
Mm-hmm.
of literary event or hip hop event or music event, like or
Mm-hmm.
theater event, and on and on and on. Like
And people attend these things, like single events of these examples, for 10 plus years and years. They'll keep on going. And it's because humans are storytellers. And people always say, well, I'm not an artist or I'm not a poet or whatever. But it's like, that's our nature,
Yeah.
and being disconnected from it is kind of like, you know, it's one of the fundamental pieces of fascism is to cut ourselves off from our expression of what we think and feel.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting too because like the kind of the genesis of this series of conversations was to have some space to talk about like craft stuff, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what makes a poem or a song work, what makes it stick
Mm-hmm.
out, what makes it, move you or whatever. But then of course part of that conversation is just like the poem doesn't have to be brilliant. It doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
a perfectly original, amazing piece of art to matter, to like hit
Mm-hmm.
somebody, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I want to have the both and there. Like I do want to move into that conversation a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, but it's also like the way that this has come up really recently is have you heard the Bruce Springsteen song about
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis?
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm a Springsteen guy, like I love old Springsteen stuff. And of course the new song, like I think I don't know what to make of it. I think on it, like do I like it or not? I think is a complicated question. I could
Yeah.
ramble on about it forever, but do
Yeah.
I appreciate it? Like
Mhm.
yes. I think
Absolutely.
it is exactly what was needed in this moment. And that is a conversation that is connected to, but also separate from this Venn diagram, right? This
Mm-hmm.
question of like craft.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
could a certain lyric have been different? Like, sure, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it is like it all matters, right? The context matters. But if we do want to take at least a moment to kind of zoom in a little bit on like, we can put that song to the side. But like when you hear a song or you hear someone else's poem,
Mm-hmm.
like are you able to identify a piece or a couple pieces that like kind of is a difference maker for you? That goes beyond like I like this, I appreciate it to like, ooh, this is gonna stick with me, this is gonna move me. The way I think about it sometimes, coming from slam stuff is like if you're a judge, and you give something that's pretty good at 8.5, like what makes you give a 9.9? You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what gets me to a 9.9? It's something that it's like it's being able to craft something that really needs to be said in a way that could really like it connects with what I know, but also illuminates it in maybe a different way. And I think that's like really important. And so then everything that goes into that allows that to happen are the things that are most important to me for in terms of like imagination and like I think it's gotta have a heart,
Yeah.
and it's gotta have a soul. So if we're gonna like if what does that really mean? It's coming from a very real place inside of a person. It's intimate, it's personal, um, and as well as reaching deeper than just what I'm feeling right now. I am seeing myself in, you know, and with sometimes it's a literary uh, tradition. Sometimes it's a tradition of activism. Sometimes it's all these different
Sure.
cultural,
Yeah.
um, all these different things that are like important. Like I am connected to other things that have come before me and other things that are going around in the world, and like speaking to that intersection of like really you and the world. Does
Mm.
that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that comes up a lot in classroom spaces or workshop spaces is like that relationship between, the personal and the universal, like the micro and the macro. Like you talk about the little thing as a way to really
Mm-hmm.
understand the big thing. Because if you just talk about the big thing, so the word that you said that relates to that to me is heart. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, man, like, how do you teach heart? Like if you're
Yeah.
if you're doing a workshop or like someone comes to you for advice on like writing, like how do you
Yeah.
teach heart? And I
I
think
was
that some
thinking
of
the
it
same thing.
I think some of it is just like via storytelling, right? Like rather than getting up on stage and just shouting at people what your political opinions are.
Mm-hmm.
Although there's a space for that too. It depends on the
Mm-hmm.
context, like we've been talking about. I think
Mm-hmm.
heart comes from this other thing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like I think, like you said, personal experience is one doorway into it. I also don't want to, say that like you have to only write about your personal experiences.
No,
Like
definitely
it
not.
has to come
But
from
it's
an
like
honest place in you, right? Like,
an
yeah.
honest place, and that's what I mean. Like it's really something that is coming from you, and I think you're right that the storytelling, if you focus on storytelling, whether it's like about you or about something that's important to you or something you learned about, or something you learned about, heard about, went and studied and came back and wrote a thing, like love a research poem.
Yeah.
um and yeah, I was, yeah, I don't know, maybe that was it.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And again, my hope is that through this conversation, through the other conversations I've had, through all the poems we brought into the space, there will also be some kind of like resource based on all this stuff where I put the links to all the poems and like links to even more poems we didn't get a chance to talk about.
Right.
I hope that through all of that, there's something useful for people. One, for people who are creative writers or poets or MCs, just to like, steel sharpen steel. Like, let's all keep challenging ourselves and learning and growing as artists. But then two, I think people who don't, like you said before, don't think of themselves as artists, and I'm thinking about like if you're an activist and you have to speak at the next rally, right? Like that can be really scary. And I think there's some stuff in this conversation that can be useful there, even if it isn't like a big performance thing. Like if you're facilitating a meeting or like doing the welcoming and the grounding at a
Mm-hmm.
training or something, like all these questions about how are we making it real? How are we zooming in? How are
Mm-hmm.
we telling stories versus just throwing information at people? How are we
Mm-hmm.
using our deliveries, our voices to hopefully have something that is authentic and real and
Mm-hmm. And human,
all of that
right?
stuff? Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing I was kind of getting to with all of that, is that it's like to conveying and connecting to our shared humanity. And again, how do you teach that? But it's like you said, it's the concrete things, and it's like filling the small concrete things with yourself in a way,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, and that's another one of these connections between an arts practice and an organizer practice, like an activist practice,
Mm-hmm.
is that some stuff you are not taught. Some stuff you just go do and you figure it out, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
show up to the thing even if you don't know what you're doing, and you
Totally.
learn something, and then you show up to
Yeah.
the next thing, and you're a little.
Yeah.
It's like a, yeah. I was gonna say
Well,
it's
and
like
it's like it's like you go to the open mic, you got something, maybe you're like, oh no, I'm not ready. Great. Go
yeah,
there 50
hang
times,
out.
whatever, like watch people perform, read poems, go to events, and then you get ideas. Stay open. Don't think
Yeah.
you know it all, you know?
And you see what that humility piece is really important, because again, to make this connection again, like between the artist and the activist, like it's the same kind of thing. If you are someone who sees what's happening right now and you know it's bad and you want to do something, you don't have to have all the answers, right? You don't have to know what you're doing. Like obviously we want to just be running around like causing chaos, but like
Mm-hmm.
the idea that you don't have to be a subject matter expert
Mm-hmm.
to organize a fundraiser for a food shelf. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
be a subject matter expert to show up to your neighborhood meeting just to like see what's going on, see what people are talking about, to get a
Mm-hmm.
whistle, wear it around your neck. Like you don't have to know what all the different amendments are in the Constitution to, to like be
Mm-hmm.
plugged into the organizing that is happening and
To
try to.
stand on the corner,
Yeah,
with a candle, just so people know somebody's
yeah,
there, you
yeah.
know? Mm-hmm.
I mean, that could be a great place to land too. There's obviously so much more we could talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been throwing it back to the guests to if there's any last like shout outs or things you want to mention, or for people who aren't in Minnesota, things you want to say, like, that's whatever.
Yeah. I did have another poem in mind.
Oh,
Is that cool?
yeah.
I've got one from, let's see.
Well, and while you pull that up, I want to mention
Yep.
too. I probably mentioned it in the other conversations, but like, there's a bunch of poems. I thought about maybe like let's look at Tish's poem or Muna or Ed Bakli has a poem. There's a bunch of really good ones, but I want their voices to share their poems. So what I'm gonna do is link to all of them. We won't
Oh,
actually
hell
like
yeah.
watch them
For
right here.
sure.
Or
Yeah, that makes sense. There is a video of Jose reading that too, so you could probably
oh,
find that.
okay.
Yeah, he read it at it was like a library, not like.
Oh, the award, like he won an award or something.
Mhm.
Yeah, just making a note.
3 years later, I found the poem. What on earth? Do I just skip it?
No, no. I mean, I can always edit this out, or I can just be charming and funny while you look for your poem.
Okay, cool. You could try. We could try both of those. Either of those things.
If I fail, then I'll just edit it out. It's
Yeah,
easy.
exactly. Oh, here it is. I got it already. Perfect.
Okay.
Uh, and you know, this is old school, but this is another one that has some really key pieces that I like to share. That's accessible. That's like, so this is Outlaw by Miguel Piñero, who is like, you know, the OG New Yorican poet, and all that. And I know, you know, we're always trying to raise up folks who are doing stuff right now. But this is just something. It's another, you know, Latino voice, Puerto Rican cat. It hit me. It hit me. Declaration 1968. This child This child felt the cold storms of winter on those hot summer days. This child went hungry on the banquet table of the church. This child played with roaches and rats for pets and found her sister lying dead beneath a bottle cap. Yes, motherfuckers, I am militant. This child was innocent of the big money plays, was ignorant of the teacher's racist ways. This child knew not why her brother died in a foreign land, killed by her brother's hands. Yes, I am a radical. This child cried at the movies, laughed at Mickey Mouse, and reached the twilight of sleep with storybook fantasies of a white knight on a white horse, loving his white lady fair in a white dress, cheated by a black mistress in a white dream. This child walked happy to religious instructions in her secondhand clothes and slept restlessly on a lice-infested bed. Yes, you degenerate motherfuckers, I am a revolutionary. Can you feel the anger in my heart? Can you see the tears fall from my face? Can you see them, these tears that control the hate? Because this child was wanted dead.
So like your performance of that is really beautiful, but I can also, because the New Yorican like style is such a thing, like I can hear his voice like even as you're performing it. Um yeah. Yeah, any reasons that one in particular came to mind for you or you wanted to share it?
I loved it. I loved, again, it was just kind of like, just here's the like,
Yeah.
the cold fact is
Yeah.
enough, but then I'm gonna do something with it, and it just punches you in the face, honestly.
Yeah, and I think that's one, it's not the only function, it's not the only approach we can take as poets, but it is one very valid one. And I think the notion that poetry can only be good if it's like subtle and mysterious and
Mm-hmm,
metaphorical, like is just so deeply ahistorical. Like so much of the
mm-hmm.
greatest poetry, the greatest music, the greatest art of all time is not particularly subtle, right? It's people
Yeah,
saying the thing that needs to be said and like
yeah,
such
and
a
it's
deep
not
one.
apolitical, you know.
Yeah.
And so they don't need to like cater to the like people who are killing us, you know. And so it's like, yes, this is radical art,
Yeah.
instead of like, yeah, just trying to paint a beautiful picture for for us all to feel or whatever. Which
Which
there's
is fine too.
there's a
There's
place for
time
that.
and a place.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's like you said, it's kind of represented in a way, and so it's nice to like, yeah, I
And
like putting that one up.
I appreciate you bringing that piece into the conversation, and then also the pieces that you shared of your own, because it shows the diversity of, like you said, diversity of tactics earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like the different approaches we can take to doing this kind of work, trying to offer something that is useful in this moment, this very,
Mm-hmm.
very bad moment. And there are a
Mm-hmm.
million different ways to do it, right? Comparing that to like the Andrea Gibson poem that Ollie shared was
Mm-hmm.
also beautiful and important and like necessary in this moment, but like just wildly different, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that is hopefully something that people can take with them. Like no matter what your personality style, like your style is, how you approach writing, like there's room for all of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think some intentionality can just be helpful. Like
Mm-hmm.
knowing
Absolutely.
what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, in context. Just, so what are other people writing? Where are people at? What are they saying? How are they approaching it? You know, like, again, just like check check shit out. It'll inspire you and live in the world, and that'll inspire you.
Thank you for listening to all these conversations. I'm going to end this video with a live performance of my own poem, Discourse, Let Your Heart Be a Whistle, from January 2026. There's a very small content warning in that I'm directly quoting the administration. And for real, it's not like slurs, but it may as well. It's just direct quotes. And this poem is called Discourse. The subtitle is Let Your Heart Be a Whistle. And the stand-up comedian laments, everyone is so sensitive these days, you can't say anything anymore. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem announces that she wants to ban visitors from, quote, every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies, unquote. And the editorial board laments, college students have a right to protest, but must be held accountable for their divisive rhetoric. Minnesota Representative and Majority Whip of the U.S. House, Tran Myhre, lies, stating that 80% of the crimes being committed in the Twin Cities in Minnesota are being committed by Somalis. And the public intellectual laments, people are getting canceled for the most trivial things these days. Careers are being destroyed over nothing. The President of the United States says, Ilhan Omar is garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. They come from hell and do nothing but bitch. We don't want them. Let them go back to where they come from. And the celebrity laments, I hate politics. I don't believe in either side, because if you're on either side, you're supporting division. Vice President J.D. Vance says, it is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, I want to live next to people who I have something in common with. I don't want to live next to 4 families of strangers. And the poet laments, 4 families of strangers. 1 child from each, I call that my grandparents. And you wouldn't know them. They never had a podcast. They weren't perfect. They weren't fascists, and when the flood came, they didn't drink it, but they also didn't pretend it wasn't there. Decades before I was born, they quietly moved their strange families to higher ground. Some had skin so light no border could weigh them down. Others had to be creative. Decades after I was born, I run out of words. Racist, bootlicking bullies and cowards, all true, all insufficient. And when the discourse of the powerful is evil on one side and indifference on the other, let your heart be a whistle, loud, piercing, taking up as much space as possible, a reminder that the call is not to say something perfect, it is to make noise. The call is not to say something smart, it is to make noise, a reminder that there is no language more divisive than the truth, a reminder that in the right moment something very small can bring something very large to its knees. For every quote unquote family of strangers, welcome. Make yourself at home. Make yourself a home here. Did you know that remembering the past and imagining the future light up the same networks in our brains? My grandparents, whether by blood or bibliography, taught me to remember where I come from, and my grandchildren, whether by blood or water rippling, teach me to remember where I stand.